Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Top 10 players for this Oregon Ducks program through the first three games of the 2024 season. I thought we'd change it up a little bit. I feel like a lot of the conversations that we've had around this Oregon program is, what needs to get better. And obviously it got better against Oregon State, but I want to highlight some players that, I thought have been really good to start 2024. Now, before we get into the list, this is not necessarily the top 10 players on this Oregon Ducks team. It's more of what are the 10 players that have impressed the most throughout the first three games of the 2024 season. Now, before we get into it, as always, I think most importantly, the Oregon Duck fans, y'all know how much I love talking about this program, the amount of support that you guys have shown the fellas. It's been amazing. We appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, would love to hear some names that I might be sleeping on early to start 2024. There are probably 15 to 20 names that I wanted to include. I went with my favorite 10, so let me have it in the comments section. Tell me some players that I might be sleeping on. And without further ado, let's get into this one and let's talk about what I think is the brightest spot on this Oregon team to start 2024. That's the inside of this defensive line, headlined by Carman, right? Came over from Michigan State. The Oregon fans who've been rocking with the fellas, going back to the offseason conversations, what is that one position that, we wanted to see take that step in 2024, really create a national championship caliber team? We wanted game records on the inside of the defensive line. I think Dan Lanning probably agreed with us because he goes out and gets Carman. You look at Carman's numbers. 14 quarterback hurries, a 22% pass rush win rate throughout the first three games. He's second on the team with 13 tackles. To kind of put that in perspective, you go back to a guy like Popo last year, who was very solid for Oregon on the inside of the defensive line. Popo only had 12 hurries all year. Carman has surpassed that in the first three games. He's living in the opponent's backfield, and he's blowing up so many, not only in the pass rush, but also in the run game. Having that disruptive force on the inside of the defensive line, we felt like wasn't really there for Oregon last year. Carman has given that to this Oregon Ducks defense early in 2024. Really impressed with Carman going to number 2. And let's talk about another transfer portal addition that's been really good, and that's Brandon Johnson. And Brandon Johnson coming over from Duke, they kind of reshuffled the secondary, put Deshaun Johnson back at that safety spot. And I think the biggest question mark was, are we going to get good play from that nickel corner spot, like how good Tashim Johnson was for Oregon last year? Like Brandon Johnson has given that to Oregon and then some. You take a look at what he's done in coverage. 9 targets, only has given up 4 receptions. That's a 44% completion percentage. But I think the thing I want to focus on the most when you're playing that nickel corner spot, right, basically being an extra defensive back, almost that third linebacker at times for this Oregon defense, you have to be able to tackle. You have to be able to give a lot in run support. That was something Tashim Johnson was so good at for Oregon last year. Brandon Johnson, only 9% missed tackle rate. He grades out by PFF as the number 1 run defender on this Oregon team. And you watch the film and say, yeah, that checks out. Like, that's not just a bogus PFF grade. Brandon Johnson's been very good in run support for this Oregon team. So he's largely checking both boxes you want to see from that nickel position, right? Really good in coverage, not a lot of throwing windows when he's targeted, and then also giving this team a lot of run support in the box. You're going to play so many different kind of Big Ten offenses over the next couple of weeks. You're going to see teams that want to run the football. You're going to see teams that want to spread you out and throw the football. Your nickel has to be able to kind of provide value both in run support and coverage. Brandon Johnson has done that throughout the first couple of games for this Oregon team, going to number 3. And maybe a hot take, but you look at the numbers, Dillon Gabriel's been really good, especially when Oregon gives him pass protection and gives him a run game. And that's kind of what we assumed Dillon Gabriel would look like to start 2024. Obviously, it kind of got off to a little bit of a rocky start, not a great rushing attack, taking some penalties, getting behind the chains. You look at Dillon Gabriel's numbers, an 84% completion percentage, 6 touchdowns to 0 interceptions, 915 yards. Yes, he's missed on a few throws that he would like to get back, but on aggregate, Dillon Gabriel's been really good for this Oregon offense. But again, I think most importantly, as this offensive line continues to kind of get back into form, which we fully expect it will. You get that run game going. He continues to build chemistry with his wide receivers. I think Dillon Gabriel only gets better from what we've seen the first 3 weeks, and obviously a brilliant performance against Oregon State before the bye week. Going to number 4, and a guy that just nobody's talking about, and if you're an Oregon fan, that's exactly how you want it at the cornerback spot, Jabar Muhammad. Like, not getting a ton of attention. That, hey, just sit on there on the island, do your thing. The less people talk about you, the better. Jabar Muhammad's been really, really good for this Oregon secondary. Taking a look at the numbers, one, before we even get into the coverage numbers, 0% was, again, advertisement here. A 0% missed tackle rate. That's something that we talk about a lot, and not a lot of people talk about in terms of cornerbacks, like your ability to tackle in space. Jabar Muhammad hasn't had a lot of opportunities to make tackles because people just aren't completing footballs on him. But when he does have the opportunity to make tackles, he's been making them. Targeted 20 times, only 10 receptions, a 50% completion percentage when targeted. Again, nobody's really talking about Jabar Muhammad, which in my opinion is a good thing. Been that true cornerback one that Oregon has been looking for. I think more importantly, as you play some of the teams that are at the top of the Big Ten, most notably Ohio State, having that cornerback that can take away a legitimate wide receiver one is going to be huge. And so far, we've seen that from Jabar Muhammad to start 2024. Going to number 5, let's talk about Jordan Burch. Jordan Burch has also been very good on the defensive line. Taking a look at Jordan Burch's numbers, 11 quarterback hurries, that's second on the team, a 15% pass rush win rate, 2.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. Those are solid numbers throughout the first 3 games. You watch the film of Jordan Burch, he's a little bit more disruptive than I think what the numbers say. He's very good against the run. You talk about an edge defender that a lot of times we just like to talk about pass rush as we get another advertisement here. A lot of times we just like to talk about pass rush in terms of edge defenders. It matters how good you are against the run. And I think Jordan Burch has been really good against the run. And quite frankly, number 6 on the list, Tatum Tuote, very, very similar conversation. He's making that step as a pass rusher. He leads this team with 7 run stops. And you look at Tatum, he plays a lot of different responsibilities for Oregon. They ask him to do a lot of things, including dropping back in space. You can tell this kid is a son of a coach. He's a very, very polished defensive lineman. He's a heady defensive lineman, a guy that might not necessarily flash in terms of numbers or even at times flash on the film. This kid's been super reliable for a sophomore defensive lineman. We talked about guys like Tatum and Mateo Yu and Blake Purchase potentially stepping up. I think Tatum has been the best out of the group to start the year. That's massive for this Oregon defense. Let's go to another name that I've just been extremely impressed with. That's Bryce Beter. Leads the team in tackles. You take a look at Bryce Beter, 25 tackles, only missing 9% of his tackles, has been great in coverage. Bryce Beter's putting it together, and I think the conversation with Bryce Beter is we don't give this kid nearly enough credit for how good of an athlete Bryce Beter is. I mean, he's flying around the football, sideline to sideline, really good in coverage. We've been kind of looking for Oregon at the linebacker position to find some difference makers to kind of complement Jeffrey Bassa. You're seeing some guys step up, especially as some of those linebackers like Jeff Bassa have been kind of on a pitch count in terms of not playing a ton, dealing with some injuries. Bryce Beter stepped up. Devin Jackson has stepped up. But Bryce Beter's consistency gave me the nod over Devin Jackson. Devin Jackson's flashing. Devin Jackson is putting it together. We've talked about that plenty. But what's most exciting for Bryce Beter is this is a guy that he is clearly a reliable linebacker for Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy. That's massive for this Oregon team. Going to another guy that he could be higher, and maybe I'm just being hard on Tez Johnson. He's coming in at number 8. I don't feel great about it. Like, Tez Johnson's certainly one of, if not the best player on this Oregon team. I think as you continue to see that chemistry get built up between Dillon Gabriel and Tez Johnson, it's only going to get better for Tez. You look at the numbers again, 21 catches, buck 90, 2 touchdowns. He's forced 7 missed tackles on the season, 87% completion percentage when targeted. Tez Johnson doesn't drop balls. He had that one kind of miscue with Dillon. He's got 2 miscues with Dillon Gabriel where he's been open in the red zone. Probably should have 4 touchdowns on the year, and Dillon Gabriel and Tez Johnson just not necessarily on the same page. Again, we think that gets better, especially coming out of a bye week. I think, again, it's really important to note that this Oregon roster, although super, super talented, is kind of new in terms of playing together. And I think we should have expected some growing pains. Now, have the growing pains been a little bit more extreme than we expected? Yeah, probably. But as this team continues to kind of build that chemistry, I think most importantly, Dylan Gabriel and guys like Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart, I think this team just continues to get better. And you're seeing it, right? Idaho super sloppy, cleaned it up a little bit against Boise State, but still pretty sloppy. And then you saw them just kind of boat race Oregon State specifically in the second half. You take that performance in terms of what we saw from Oregon in the second half against Oregon State. That's that national championship caliber team that we expected. And again, coming out of a bye week, getting guys back healthy, continuing to build that chemistry. I only think Oregon builds off that performance early in the year. Going to number 9, Jordan James. Jordan James has been really good. I don't think the offensive line blocked as well as you would have liked to start the year. You saw him really kind of come on against Oregon State. You look at Jordan James's numbers. He's averaging 6.5 yards per carry, which is damn good. 13 missed tackles forced on only 44 carries. The number that kind of jumps out to me that I think people were sleeping on with Jordan James, going back to how we talked about him during the offseason, he's got 12 carries for 10 plus yards. I feel like the narrative around Jordan James is he's just a short yardage goal line back, and that's kind of how he was used when Bucky Irvin was on this roster in 2023. We all kind of knew Jordan James is a guy that can be explosive at the running back position too. And when you block him up so he can get to the second level free, he has the ability to make people miss and be an explosive running back. And that's kind of what we've seen when he's been blocked up the right way. Jordan James has been good. Again, not necessarily reflected on the box score all that much. Been really, really, 283 yards in 3 games is almost averaging 100 yards per game. That's a very, very quality number for Jordan James. Last player I want to talk about, and we left off the offensive line because, again, it hasn't been great to start the year. Is it a coincidence that this offensive line suddenly figures it out with Nishad Strother getting the start against Oregon State? That was by far the best performance we've seen from the offensive line. And quite frankly, you go back to the Boise State game, when Nishad came in, the offensive line looked better. Like, he might have been that missing piece where you get to put Poncho back at center, where we all think that's his best position. You put Nishad at guard. As of right now, I'm kind of interested to see where Oregon goes on the offensive line. Like, Matthew Bedford probably getting back healthy after the bye. Do you just stick with Nishad, who's a player that a lot of Oregon fans were really excited about, even going back to last year? He's played a ton of football going back to his time at East Carolina. Didn't play a ton for Oregon in 2023, but this kid, every time he's played, I feel like it's been really, really good. I call him a kid. He's a 6-year senior. I think Nishad might be the missing piece to this Oregon offensive line. And I think the fact that this Oregon offensive line seems to play their best football with him in the 5-man rotation, I think is telling in terms of how good Nishad Strother's been for this Oregon program. Left off a lot of good players, right? Terrence Ferguson, 14 targets. He has 13 receptions, over 90% completion percentage when Terrence Ferguson's been targeted. Left off Evan Stewart, been pretty good for Oregon. Left off guys like Johnny Cornelius, Josh Connerly, guys that have been pretty good for Oregon, but we all know they can be better. I think that's the most exciting conversation for the Oregon fans is, hey, some of our best players haven't even played their best football yet to start the 2024 year. What does this Oregon team look like when they start playing their best football, which I think will happen at some point? That's when you get the national championship caliber team that we all expected. These are my top 10 players that I've been most impressed by to start 2024. Left out a lot of good players. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Again, appreciate all the support y'all have shown the fellas. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all